My name is Preston McCall. I'm a painter, artist, and have been so all my life. Let me tell you some stories about how I got here. Having painted some 1,300 paintings and having owned two different galleries in Santa Fe, New Mexico, I've seen quite a bit about what the life of an artist is really about, or at least from my perspective. I grew up in Wichita in a fairly normal middle-class background. I have an older sister who became an art professor and a younger brother who is an industrial designer, so I see I must have come along with some good genes for being creative. My mother was an amateur painter and participated in a variety of women painter groups that I, as a youngster, attended. I was on my best behavior as the old ladies, probably in their 30s, patted me on the head and gave me candy to keep me occupied. They made me draw a bit and gave me great encouragement, despite the fact that my drawings were probably horrid. The most intoxicating part of those women's painting groups was the exposure to that fragrance of turpentine, a very unique odor. Years later, when I went to art school at the University of Kansas, the first visit to the painting department, where I smelled turpentine, made me feel like I was home. We associate odors to unusual events from our past, and when we run into one that causes us to recall a sense of like or dislike occurs, I notice. That smell caused me to feel like I was where I really needed to be. Then, when I was about 12, I wanted to take a drawing class as the new Wichita Art Association had relocated right across the main street near our home. My mother enrolled me into a life drawing class. I imagined it would be about going out and drawing life, cows, horses, barns, nature and stuff. With my new drawing newsprint pad, my charcoal sticks, and my kneaded eraser, I sat on the front row in my first class with about 10 others who were all old people, probably about 30 years old. A woman came in wearing a kimono and stood on the platform some 10 feet away. I was ready for whatever they're going to throw at me. Then the kimono dropped, and standing there was this beautiful naked woman. I was shocked and very surprised. The only naked woman I was ever able to see was in the National Geographic, and there were pictures of natives over in Africa or somewhere. The class broke out laughing. I was humiliated and embarrassed for the woman and decided I better learn how to draw fast. I took some art classes in high school and bought some acrylics and canvases. Playing around, I was mesmerized by the rich color and how difficult it was to paint anything that looked even remotely like reality. I saw that learning how to draw first was critical if I was ever going to be successful at this now fascinating interest. I chose to go to the University of Kansas and study art. With limited resources, I spent the next 4 years trying to learn how to draw, especially the figure, which is the hardest thing to get correct. Proportions, line quality, lighting, and even making the face actually look like the model I was drawing were impossibly difficult. I persisted as I really did want to master this and saw I was improving every year. The best part was there were many beautiful women in these classes, and that seemed like quite a bonus. However, being on limited means, it was a challenge. I did manage and graduated with what I felt was a good set of drawing skills and a significant study of art history. Needless to say, there were no jobs for us with BFAs. I had worked at my father's used car lot and then on to a Pontiac dealership in the summers, where I learned how to detail automobiles. I worked part-time doing this and earned some good cash. Realizing I needed some additional education, I began a master's degree program in architecture for non-majors. It was rigorous. I had to take physics, calculus, engineering, and of course more drawing classes. Naturally, I excelled at the drafting and drawing compared to the other students from the science fields, math majors, and the Western Civ people. The classes were hard, and a tremendous effort was exerted on being able to work very fast. I had begun working for the local Chrysler dealership part-time and was able to pay for my existence, buy my first house, become involved with a wild, red-headed girlfriend, and even still found some time to paint. I had some dozen of my first narrative paintings and somehow talked a gallery in Wichita into giving me my first solo exhibit. Wow, I actually sold some work and felt like I was on my way to becoming a painter. Architecture did not enthrall me. Way too many technical details in engineering. I chose to not go further as an architect. Instead, I knew how to detail automobiles and rented a small garage to begin my first detail shop. In a year, I had some 15 employees and I moved into a neighborhood grocery store building 2 blocks away from the shop. My house payment was $187, but there was an apartment upstairs that I rented out for $150, so it was a very easy existence. The shop was booming, and I had a studio where I painted in my spare time. The wild redhead ran off with some dart thrower, and I was left with a good business and my studio. A friend of mine from art school had gone to Chicago to work in a sign shop and learn hand lettering. He would come see me after he moved back to Lawrence and see how easy it was for me to start a business. I had a vacant building behind the detail shop, and we started a new sign company there. I kept my car shop going and began learning how to hand letter. Bear in mind, this was before computers. Signs were made with patterns, opaque projectors, and a very complicated process to make a fine sign. Learning how to hand letter was like learning how to draw all over again. The sign shop prospered, although after a few years I sold out to my partner and moved my car shop into a much larger building. We had made a transition into doing body and paint work and focused on restoring older cars. I had to build a large paint booth, which was also a fabulous well-lit painting studio for my art. I had some 20 to 25 employees, and we were enjoying the success of the operation despite the overhead and management challenges for me. We began restoring fire trucks, antique cars, and a lot of old stuff, which became ever increasingly more difficult restorations. I ran this shop for 10 years and enjoyed the freedom it gave me with being able to continue my fine art painting. I would hire models to come out to the shop in the evenings when we were closed and would pose them in and around these interesting old cars. It was fun, and I produced some very good work. Finally, I realized I was not getting very far ahead financially with the overhead so high of the shop. A friend of mine was involved with a group of new car stores, and they had a Chevy store out in Junction City, Kansas, about 100 miles west of Lawrence. I sold out, auctioned off many of my expensive tools, and moved to help manage this dynamic dealership. Out there are the Flint Hills of Kansas. I would drive around out in the country on Sundays and draw the rolling hills. I had studied landscape painting back in art school from a noteworthy landscapist named Robert Sudlow, and my landscape drawings in pastels intrigued me. I still had to pour myself into the serious job of running the Chevy store, which was an 80-hour-a-week project. The money was great and the people were fabulous, but after two and a half years I quit. I missed my art too much and was also in love with a woman in Kansas City I had met some years before. I moved back to Lawrence not knowing what I wanted to do to earn a living. I had heard about showroom window painting and drove out to Los Angeles to see what was out there. I was impressed. Almost every car dealership and fast food restaurant had their windows painted in bright fluorescent paints. Wow! I drove around LA for days photographing what I saw and even found some people to talk to about how they did it. After a few months, I drove back to the Kansas City area and began painting windows and car windshields. Bingo, I was making as much as running a Chevy store and now had time to paint. One day, a car pulled up to the front of the Jeep store I was painting the windows for, and the couple introduced themselves as from Taco Bell. Would I like to paint Taco Bell windows? Within a year, I was working with Taco Bell, McDonald's, Wendy's, Hardee's, KFC, Burger King, Pizza Hut, and many of the new car stores, being what I called a splash artist. I painted window splashes. 32 years later, I still paint windows and love the medium. It is fast, temporary, and always a creative challenge. My girlfriend in Kansas City and I married after dating on and off again for 12 years. She even began helping me paint somewhat and really loved using the hot pink color. Oh well, it was fun and we were growing the business. We had both spent some time in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and decided to go there to see art, shop, and vacation at the wonderful La Fonda Hotel. It was a real eye-opener for me as there were some 200 galleries art there. After several more trips back, I began trying to find a gallery to show my work and discovered how incredibly difficult it was, as I did not really know what to do. They had forgotten to mention this to us in art school, probably because so few of the faculty were actually showing in many galleries, and because they had academic gigs of teaching, they didn't really need it. Oh well. I found a few galleries and began showing some paintings, mostly landscapes. Few were selling, and it seemed to me that owning a gallery would be much more control over what I wanted to show and sell. I had a fairly good amount of work and began learning more and more about galleries. It was the late 90s, and my sister lived some 40 miles east of New York City on Long Island. I thought I should go check out New York again, as I had been there several times before and knew there were many, many galleries. Full of myself, I packed a nice briefcase with pictures of my work and flew to New York in hopes of finding a gallery who would give me a one-man show. I never heard the word no so elegantly spoken as in New York. I persisted, but after 85 galleries, amazingly, I found a gallery in Soho that would give me a one-man show. It only took me 4 days of grueling walking around and hearing all the baloney the other galleries told me. In the late '99, I had the Solo in Soho show to my amazement. 1,000 people showed up. I actually sold some work. Then I learned all about how to get paid. Several months later, after connecting to the art fraud unit of the New York Police Department, amazingly, the check was forthwith. A definite sour taste in my mouth for New York lingered. Santa Fe did not seem to be so daunting. I continued my window painting business and lettering windshields for my car dogs. Yes, windshields. I have painted some 185,000 windshields in my 32 years of doing this. I love doing these as they are fast and always well received. After another couple of years and several more trips back to Santa Fe, I decided to find a space to have a gallery there. Only costing some $10,000 a month in rent and all the other expenses, I began the first gallery at 221 San Francisco, a couple of blocks off the plaza, in a nice space. I had a studio in the back and hired an excellent director to run the place, as I would go back to Kansas City once a month to paint windows for a week. Returning back down the 700-mile trail to Santa Fe and paint some more landscapes, we carried another 25 artists and sold quite a bit of work. But what really mattered was that I had sold some 350 of my paintings. I saw firsthand how controlling the space was key despite the $20,000 a month overhead per month. The real estate company who owned the building was going to build a boutique hotel immediately next to our space. It was a great incentive to take the occupancy there, and I imagined it would become a terrific spot to sell high-end art. Needless to say, the real estate company changed their minds and did not build the hotel, and no, they did not lower the rent, and when the lease came due, they only offered a slight decrease. Tricked again, I sold off the assets and returned to Kansas City to paint more windows and paintings. Then in 2005, my wife and I went to Europe for a great trip, seeing all the art I needed to gawk at. Florence, Paris, and London. My wife did a superb job of arranging all of the excursions, and the Europeans were warm and friendly wherever we went. On the plane ride home, however, she announced that now her son was out of the nest and that we should separate. That till death do us part pledge seemed to be just an excuse for my being the dad her son never really had. We divorced amicably, and I ended up with a mid-century cool house with a fabulous studio. About this time, some of my new car dealership accounts asked me to paint some portraits of vintage automobiles. I took on this challenge with great interest and have produced a nice body of these, mostly sold. The car paintings are photoreal and very tricky to make accurate, like figure paintings. In many respects, details that only car dogs would ever notice are critically important. A door handle, an emblem, or some wrong trim detail are all details that are vitally important to get correct. They are fun to do, but they have to be correct. I began dating, and after several more years, couple of years, I met Susie, a fellow artist and a beautiful soul. We hit it off immediately, and by 2014, we decided to sell our houses and move to Santa Fe to open another gallery up on Canyon Road. We found an enchantingly beautiful home up in the hills east of town with spectacular views of the mountains and leased a space for the gallery. We sold quite a bit of our paintings and took on numerous other artists. After 2 years, we moved it down closer to the beginning of Canyon Road with a sculpture garden right on the street. The compound of other galleries around us were friendly and very upscale. The sculpture garden attracted some fabulous American Indian sculptors that we came to know and love. Being around the American Indians was a big surprise, as we felt a real connection to them and enjoyed their company very much. We began to hit our stride and sell more of our works. The new space, with the director, insurance, utilities, and rent, ran us about $22,000 a month. So we had to sell art. It was a 7-day-a-week affair, and every Friday night we had an opening, like many of the other galleries on Canyon Road. The traffic was lively and supportive. In the 4 years there, I managed to sell another 350 of my paintings, and for more than I had when we were downtown years before. The lease came due, and we decided to sell it off and try running the gallery online, which was considerably easier now that we had a respectable client base. After another 2 years, the pandemic threatened things. We moved back to Kansas City, and had we waited just one more day, the movers would have not moved us due to the shutdown in New Mexico. We found a wonderful place in Overland Park with ample storage for our 500 paintings and sculpture we now owned. Building racks and documenting all the work was a huge task. Everything had to be rephotographed and measured once again. Storing the paintings and know where each one was stored became a constant task, as knowing where they are is always a problem when one sells. Having a good documentation procedure is essential, we learned. Today, we continue to sell work online, and despite the quarantine, we have stayed busy with our painting and my video production skills. I still get called to paint a few windows, and soon, with the pandemic easing, we will begin calling on more and more window painting clients and begin trying to find some more galleries to show our work. I have produced some dozen new narrative paintings since returning to Kansas City. These are intricate and small pieces that I love making. I have enough landscapes left over, and my interest really is more toward my narratives at this point than the landscapes or the automobile paintings. Thank you for watching this. I wanted to talk about how I have made a life out of my art making and hope it inspires a few others to keep at it. Making art and making a living from it is really a terribly hard chore. You just have to keep at it and get all of the good advice you can find. But most importantly, you have to keep painting and especially learn to know what exactly you really want to paint. Look forward to more of these naked artist exposure videos where I talk more about being an artist and show some work from some other artists I admire and love. I like to present the other artist's work from my painter's point of view and not just from an art historical perspective. Click the like and subscribe buttons and watch for the next one of these. Thank you once again, and I am Preston McCall. Thank you.